Exodus 20, thou shalt not make for yourself a graven image. And Leonard Slane points this out in his book, The Alphabet versus the Goddess. The second commandment forbids Israelites from conveying any iconic information. No illustrations, no colorful drawings, and no art. So far as we know, there has never before existed a culture that forbade representative art. Why should a prohibition against making images be the second most important rule for righteous living? According to the Ten Commandments, art, therefore, is more dangerous than murder. I hope we've been pointing out why. It's because they wanted the arsenal for themselves. Take it out of the hands of humanity. Take it out of the shaman. Take it out of the true keepers of truth. And hoard it for yourself because you've got an agenda. Jerry Mander says the same thing. The Hebrews emerging between 3000 and 2000 BC won an important political victory by denouncing what they called the worship of graven images. By destroying the power of the sculptures of the Sumerians and others who preceded them, they effectively destroyed nature-based religion and the veracity of images. Biologically, it means, and psychologically, they close off a whole part of your brain. They want to put a wall between the left and the right brain, is basically what happened, between the masculine and the feminine capacities. That's how you control, isn't it? Divide and conquer, right? In this sign you will conquer. This made possible, he says, the substitution of an abstract, single, male, human, all-powerful God, because it was a sin to create any sculpture of it. It maintained its abstract nature. And so much can be said of this. It's like cutting off your hands. They're cutting off one part of your brain because they're going to control what's left by using this powerful symbolism that is archival. It's absolutely in your race memory, going back to the connection that you have directly with nature, to the stars. Everything in religion, I don't give a damn if it's Protestant or Catholic, comes from astrotheology, the history and the study of the stars. And that is in the deepest reservoir of your unconscious. And while you're tapped into that gnosis, you can't be controlled. So they have to put those barriers up. They have to put those electrical fences up so that they block and canalize that imagination body. It's going to be very important because when we look at solutions in a minute, this is the way forward once you've understood it. But first of all, if poison has been pouring into your home, you can't start the cleaning up process until you shut the door on the sewer, isn't it? So this is what we're doing. You're going to do the cleanup through your life. But you first have to make sure that the poison doesn't keep pouring in. So the immunity that you get from understanding what these characters are up to immediately shuts down the process. You're completely onto it critically. That closes the door, and then the cleanup is even easier. There really are no other remedies. The great philosopher from Germany, Leibniz, it is a great source of error to believe that there is no perception in the soul besides those of which it is conscious. Before Freud, talking 1700s here, 18th century, already understood. Pascal even had spoken of the same thing. Schopenhauer, about how the brain is just besieged with all of the stimuli. The opponents, as we said, they know what we're never supposed to know. Joseph Goebbels, the Nazi minister of propaganda, he said, this is the secret of propaganda. Those who are to be persuaded by it should be completely immersed in the ideas of the propaganda without ever noticing that they are immersed in it. Remember the comments of Edward Bernays, the modern mind controllers and persuaders? I'll leave you with this for this section by Alvin Boyd Kuhn. This incredible statement by Alvin Boyd Kuhn. Alvin Boyd Kuhn, by the way, was the prodigy of Gerald Massey, the great Scottish Egyptologist. And Alvin Boyd Kuhn says, hypnotism need not be induced by overt manipulation or by an operative. One can hypnotize oneself. And the agency can be a suggestion, a philosophy, a persuasion, a conviction, a belief, an infatuation, a book, a sermon, a piece of music, a personality, an addiction of any kind. Hold a conviction long enough, and it ends by holding you. Now we know it as obsession and what have you. If you really take this to the full extent of what he's saying, thinking itself is a primal addiction. We spoke before about Heidegger not even using the word consciousness to describe the thought of most people. And the idea is that over time, and I believe that's what we're seeing right now, is that because of this pestilence, and this is one of the things in the armory of the sorcerers, they knew that by purveying this for years and years and years, this slow drip feed method, that in the end, man would auto-hypnotize himself. Demons may lead you to the brink of the precipice, but they actually can't make you jump. You do that yourself out of fear, and then they have the last laugh. If you're out of your power, you're the victim of anything. A small breeze can topple an oak tree, if that oak tree is not properly, rooted. Because in the in the personality of human beings, it's a simple axiomatic fact of psychology that your psyche, in order to grow high, right, like a great tree, you must at the same time be sinking your roots deeply into the earth. And that means into yourself, into your own soil, into the soil of truth and reality. Otherwise you may grow very high and then it's, what? Catastrophe. And when you fall, you don't just destroy yourself, you take half the forest with you. Anyway, what we'll do now is move to solutions to conclude with. So that we can get even a greater handle on this. So that, yeah, looking at the problem is balanced also by resolving it. We'll cover I'll introduce you to a couple of interesting sources and books in a minute. Again, people can always stay tuned to the 2012 webcast we did, The Future of Mankind, which connects with what we're going to be talking about right now. My Outsider series, 3 interviews, also pertains to this. And those are all on my new account, Unslaved Films, on YouTube. Again, I emphasize that's the only legitimate account. Unslaved Media and Unslaved Films and Unslaved.com. One of the important books I'd like to bring to your attention and the work of a man is Theodore Roszak, The Voice of the Earth. He also wrote a fantastic book called Where the Wasteland Ends. 2 very important books, C.J. Jung, Carl Jung's works on nature. A book called The Earth Has a Soul, and a monumentally important book by the great psychologist Bruno Bettelheim, personal friend of Sigmund Freud, about the mistranslation of Freud's work and books, right down to the titles. So when people talk about knowing Freudianism, there's a whole conspiracy against Freud run by the American Psychiatric Association to basically de-spiritualize his work. And this is a very important book that addresses this, about how even the terminology, when he talked about the conscious and unconscious minds, his words in German were loaded with spiritual meaning and really deep existential meanings, and those were purposely mistranslated to make him appear to be a materialist reductionist. A conspiracy against his work. And a very heavy-hitting psychologist. Beautifully written and very valuable book. From a more of a scientific bent, or let's say alternative bent, a book I refer to a lot of my work is Richard Milton, The Shattering the Myths of Darwin. Again, a heavy hitter. He was the scientific correspondent for the Observer magazine, who deals with the whole evolution lie. On my Irish Origins appendix pages, there's also a little page there on the lie of evolution. 2 important books again on alternative science. The Holographic Universe by Michael Talbot, which goes deeply into the work of David Bohm and Carl Pribram on the connections between the mind and nature, consciousness and the world, subatomic science, quantum science, what is known as the implicate order, as opposed to the explicate order. A very reader-friendly book, an absolute masterpiece. For those who are even more into the science, The Big Bang Never Happened by Eric J. Lerner. That is a wonderful book that goes into the works of Hans Alfvén, the Swedish scientist, and his plasma cosmology that refutes the Einsteinian paradigm. A little more heavy reading though. Leonard Schlehn's Art and Physics and The Alphabet versus the Goddess, I think, are essential reading. More from what we'll be talking about today, the existentialist paradigms that we'll be discussing. If people are really unfamiliar with this existentialistic angle that I deal with a lot in my work, such as Disciples of the Mysterium, Colin Wilson's The Outsider is a very good introduction. And if you're more into fiction, then of course Hermann Hesse, the great author, will introduce you to that paradigm, the existentialistic paradigm. And I guess if you're into poetry, then of course we can mention many names, the top of which is Rainer Maria Rilke. Alan Watts's The Book, we'll be referring to that a lot in this presentation. The full title is The Book on the Taboo Against Knowing Who You Are. And the very important book that I refer to a lot, Erich Fromm's The Anatomy of Human Destructiveness. Again, phenomenally important works of Arno Gruen, The Betrayal of the Self, The Insanity of Normality. Very much akin to R.D. Laing, because these are, along with Thomas Szasz, these are the people who are the anti-psychiatric psychologists.